Hello, I would like to welcome you all to this program on navigating choppy waters, how to chart adolescence and with PKU with your team. I am Debbie Builder, a pediatrician, a child psychiatrist, and a general psychiatrist at the University of Utah. These are my disclosures. So I'd like to introduce you to our panel. First, we will hear from Kelly Grossman, a young adult with PKU in Lehi, Utah, and she's going to talk about her firsthand experience on navigating adolescence with PKU. Then I will be talking about parenting teens with PKU as they sail towards independence. And then finally, Dr. Mina Wynn Driver, who's a clinical psychologist at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Springdale, Arkansas, we'll be discussing teaching your teen how to make decisions in hot and cold situations.
Okay, thank you so much. I am Kelly Grossman, and I will just dive right in with my experience having PKU. I was diagnosed with PKU at birth. I grew up with three older brothers without PKU and one sister, Katie, who, funny enough, was actually born on my exact birthday, and she has PKU. And that has been such a fun, helpful dynamic. I tell people that having my sister with PKU to understand has been magical, and her support has truly meant everything to me over the years, especially when I had all that lineup of brothers who did not understand PKU. To maintain my levels in the 2.0 range, I eat 5.5 grams of protein a day and a combination of two separate formulas. I am lucky in that I have always really loved my formula. Getting that down for the day has never been a problem for me. And I find that it's actually been a good foundation for me to build upon when my PKU management gets tricky. My parents were very committed to my PKU management and very supportive of me growing up, especially my mom, with the cooking and exploring new recipes that tried to help me control my levels, but also help me lead as normal a life as possible. Despite her commitment and her best efforts, I didn't enjoy most specialty foods and really found myself clinging to low protein pasta and rice, especially. I know that she diligently tried engaging me in the joy of cooking, but the interest was just not there for me. My elementary school years, I remember being slightly self-conscious of eating different food and trying to maybe be a little bit subtle about when I was eating things and hiding it a little bit. Around this time, I also attended two separate camps with my non-PKU cousin, and these were PKU camps. I made fun memories being there, and I remember enjoying the convenience of having a place cater to PKU needs. But outside of a few small activities done with my clinic, I never dove really hard into the PKU community. It was nice for me to see PKU kids living normal, healthy lives. But ultimately, I found that I was happy just being me and dwelling with my own sphere of friends at home. By my late high school years, I realized that nobody cared as much as I thought they did that I had PKU and maybe had to do things a little bit differently. I think those were just the normal self-conscious thoughts of any high school teenager. This time in high school was also where I became disinterested in grades and activities. I cannot stress to you how much of an angry teenager I was. I say I was the epitome of an angry teenager. And I remember counting down the days to graduation. I was just ready for new scenery and new challenges. To get me to the end of high school, my mother posted a very kind note in my bedroom that said, "I can do hard things." She always believed in me. And as an adult, I reflect on that actually fairly often. And I realized that my mom always knew that I could do hard things. But as a teenager with this very real, very challenging diet restriction, I was learning that for the first time in my life. I was having the experiences to prove to myself that I could be strong and disciplined. And I think the constant support of my family really kept me grounded, even when my actions strayed from PKU. My challenges began when I spent a semester away from home during college. It was experiencing that total independence for the very first time. And as you might expect, I did go off the deep end. I ate all kinds of new foods, and the only thing that I truly remember staying away from was meat. Everything else was kind of free game in my mind. I loved Asian food with noodles and vegetables, ice cream, and especially pizza. It was about 3 to 4 months into that lifestyle that I started experiencing the effects of high Phe in my blood. Both my mother and my closest friend came to me separately and had mentioned just in a loving way that they were a bit fearful for me, and they were noticing that I was becoming forgetful and would lose my train of thought very quickly when speaking. This was very embarrassing for me when they came to me, these people that I love and cherish, and they kind of confronted me a little bit. It was embarrassing. And more importantly, it was scary because I felt like I truly knew where this was stemming from. And I'm grateful that they shared their concern, because I realized that must have been hard for them as well. From here, it became a mourning process for me to really accept that I do have PKU. I tested those boundaries and I realized that I can't pretend that I don't have it, because those high blood levels call me out and I was having cognitive issues. Ultimately, I decided that I am tough and I want a normal life. I will rise to the challenge of PKU. It does come with great sacrifices, but that was truly a very powerful moment in my PKU journey. I had to give myself permission to be sad and even mad that I didn't get to have a normal life. Really process those feelings before I was able to move forward with all the good aspects of having PKU. Knowing that I wanted to leave a productive, happy, just normal life with things like getting married and having my own family one day are really what spurred change in me. I made a personal commitment to uh, slowly return to my diet, and with the help of friends and family in my clinic, that was possible. And it was a challenging process, but I kind of break it down into 3 separate steps. Number one, I've mentioned that thankfully I did love drinking my formula. So step one for me became consistently hitting my formula goals for the day. The next change that I implemented was starting to cut out the foods that weren't Phe friendly. These are like the no foods that I had no business eating in the first place. And honestly, that it probably took a good 6 months for me to be doing that consistently. Step three was substituting other high Phe foods that were maybe in the maybe category for other options that were Phe friendly, like gluten-free or low protein. It took time and incremental steps for me to, I say, break up with food. It was hard to fall out of love with foods that I had come to enjoy, but I did get there. And I've been able to keep those changes sustainable. If there was one thing that I could alter about my experience with PKU, I think I would have loved just a little bit more empathy by addressing the fact that it is very hard. I put myself in my mother's shoes, and it must have been absolutely exhausting to constantly be on top of what I was eating and planning how to teach me these invaluable life lessons that I would need, these skills that I would need. And I do realize it's probably a fine line between, balancing pushing me very hard and also indulging the not so fun parts of PKU and those feelings that I was having. But every so often, I think it would have validated the hardship if someone I love and trust got down on my level with the not so pleasant feelings of anger or hardship and said, as a fun example, Kelly, I was eating out at lunch yesterday and I thought about all the foods that you smell and you see, but that you have to live without. And I'm just really sorry you have to go through that. I'm going to abstain from fast food this week for you, just something like that. I had to have a few very hard experiences, but at the end of the day, I had to learn for myself that the discipline of tight diet control leads me to the life that I truly desire. Not only is it worth the sacrifice, but now it has become a source of great pride and self-identity in myself. I'm 31 years old and married, and I have a beautiful 6-year-old daughter who is just healthy and vibrant. I think this is truly what I want to leave you with is that my experience has been that I believe that whatever groundwork a parent lays at home with their PKU child makes an impact. I always look back to my supportive family and the sacrifices made, especially by my mother, that made me feel like I could do hard things. And it truly imprinted powerful tools in my adult life that helped me come back when I was ready. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. That was great. And now I'm going to talk about parenting teens with PKU as they sail towards independence. These are my disclosures and disclaimer. So for teenagers, they're going through this transition. That's a normal transition for teenagers to go through. It really is going from the period of time when they're school age, meaning that they're in grade school, where their opinion, their parents' opinion is the opinion that they listen to. And it evolves, through adolescence into adulthood to the point where it's the peers' opinion that really matters. And yes, that happens pretty quickly. And I want to just talk about just a normal childhood adolescent development, the stages that are there and the goals that are there for that child to meet. During the school age years, their goal really is to figure out, where do I shine? What am I good at? What do I really like? What do I really enjoy? What makes me feel like me? Because when they become an adolescent, that's when they are figuring out who they are. And as they figure out who they are, we want it to be based on really positive things, those things that they figured out that are positive about themselves during those school age years. And as that teenager figures out who they are and they start really solidifying that sense of themselves, that's what really allows them that opportunity to share that with other people, with their peers, as a late adolescent, young adult, and develop those very close, intimate relationships. And then when we think about PKU, of course, there's this need for independence as these teenagers are growing up. And invariably, there is less parental oversight, which subsequently leads to loosening of the diet as that teenager figures out how to take care of their PKU with less support from their parent, as well as trying to make this work with the rest of the life that they're dealing with. And as their diet loosens, their Phe elevates, and on top of their already, predisposition to having mood disturbances, as a teenager, you add in that elevated Phe, which also is going to contribute to that as well. As you hear Kelly talk about, she noticed just feeling more foggy or having more difficulty concentrating. So between that and the mood disturbance, how this can also lead to challenges at school. And then subsequently, to parent-teen conflict. And I want to emphasize that I know it's listed here in a linear way. It really is a lot going on at once. In fact, I think of this as a snowball rolling downhill. And once you get to that point, as a teenager, as a young adult, like Kelly said, where she realized this isn't what I want for myself, I have other goals, rather than trying to go backwards and kind of climb back up the hill, it's really about just pausing and recognizing where you're at, what your goals are, assessing your current strengths and your current challenges, as Kelly did. And then in light of this, strategize, navigate, that path or that course towards meeting that goal. And for Kelly, she recognized how her lowest hanging fruit was really the formula. She's always loved formula. It made sense for her to start there. And over time, it was a process. It wasn't something that she expected out of herself overnight. She realized this is going to take time, and she paced herself thinking about what can she do next as she's accomplished each of those smaller goals to get to the point over about 6 months to feel like she had her fee and her abilities back to where she wanted them to meet her goals. So as parents, first of all, I would just like to say you did it. You did hard things. In those first years of life, you prevented substantial changes in your child's brain. The fee toxicity that occurs in infancy and early childhood is quite dramatic. It causes permanent brain damage. And you kept that from happening because of all the work that you did. And you got them to adolescence with that foundation. They have that thanks to you. And I want to let you know that the changes in the brain that we see, which we can see on imaging, are different than the changes that would have happened in early childhood and infancy. Those changes lead to permanent brain damage. They just physiologically are different than the changes we see in the brain in the adolescents and adults whose fee control loosened and they were experiencing elevated fees. There's no evidence of permanent brain damage during this time. In fact, it's shown to be reversible. And with this, I just want to impart to you that you have a type of wiggle room as that parent now that you really didn't have in their early childhood. And so as we talk about strategies over these next few minutes, just to encourage you to be calm and stay positive as you help your child navigate this time. So with that parenting conflict, inherently there's this propensity towards arguing. And you may even be asking yourself, could this be higher fee, or is this just related to the teenage years? Well, the important thing to recognize, the degree to which it could be higher fee, is that at that higher fee, your teenager is not going to be able to listen or pay good attention to what you're saying. They're not going to be able to process what you're arguing about with them. And this just isn't a solution, I think, that is likely to lead you and your teenager to where you want to go as readily as a more positive approach. And you may find that well-supported teens can be more compliant with their diet, but either way, they feel well-supported, they perceive that, and that can help them with their experience of confidence and positivity, which itself can help them with that confidence to take on things that are difficult, like getting back in control of their diet with the pieces that are most accessible to them. I think the big thing to keep in mind during this time is to really focus with your child and help them focus on what they're good at beyond their PKU. Help them develop an identity of who they are besides just a child with PKU. So just to let you know, the teenagers with PKU do experience guilt. In fact, those with severe early treated PKU experience more guilt than those with mild or moderate PKU when they do slip off the diet. And, could this be related to, guilt around relaxing the diet, or related to parents reinforcing and reminding them that they need to get back on diet, or their own sense of just conflict and recognizing how important their diet is and trying to resolve getting on the diet or being adherent, and then recognizing how it may make them feel different from other people. So I'd like to encourage you to really try to avoid evoking shame in them as you're trying to support them and help them. And once again, rather than focusing on what they're doing wrong in regards to taking care of their PKU, you might find that numerous around you. Really recognize what they are doing right and what they're doing that is helping themselves with PKU, and then celebrate those successes with their diet and help them develop that confidence so that they themselves can think about where they're at and when they're ready to continue moving forward. So it can be like a dance. And I use this analogy, it's Dr. Susan Waisbrun's analogy. Dr. Waisbrun is from Boston, up at Harvard. And she calls it the dance. And I really love how she refers to it as such, because that's how I think about this navigation with your teenager with PKU. So the parents, you consider the right balance between keeping the steps and stability, and yet having that flexibility so that your teenagers can think up some new steps and yet still know they have your support. not a support as a kid with PKU, but your support as their child. Often just in general, as I'm working with teenagers, parents will ask me, well, how do I know what rules to put in place or when to react, when something is going so poorly that I need to intervene? And so I like to share with them the 5 rules of teenagers that I learned during my residency training 20 years ago. Because what these 5 rules do is they position you and your teenager to a point where if the teenager does make a decision that leads to a poor outcome, that outcome is not going to be so severe that they can't recover from that they can make mistakes and they can learn how to recover from those mistakes and move on. And so the 5 rules are: do nothing illegal. That includes drinking alcohol under 21 and smoking under 18, and certainly smoking marijuana. It means going to school, even though particularly if their fees are elevated, they may not be able to focus as well and get as much from school, but they need to be in school. And then doing their chores. They live at your home, they can do their chores. I also feel it's important for parents to know where their teenager is at all times. This may be different as far as now compared to 20 years ago when we didn't have the cell phones, where you do have a more ready ability to find out where they are. They could be perhaps even more passive in letting you know where they're going to be if you have the app on to be able to check where they're at. But just for safety reasons, it's important for you to know where they're at. And then following the basic family rules of the household. I encourage families not to get to more than 3 rules. And these are rules that everyone in the household is expected to follow, not just that teenager, like curfew, or other just basic expectations in the household. And outside of following these rules, you can feel more comfortable supporting your teenager's autonomy. And when these rules start falling apart in regards to your teenager, I think that's the time to really think about whether you and your teenager need some additional help. There are some caveats with teenagers with PKU. It is hard. It's really hard, as Kelly was saying. And in particularly with safety, driving with high fee concentrations could be dangerous because of how that fee affects their response time, their focus, and that's a consideration to have as a parent, and in regards to access to a car. There's pregnancy. Obviously, things are different in pregnancy for teenage girls with PKU versus those without. The repercussions of it are very different with maternal PKU concerns. So I think it may help for you to let your teenager know that you trust them. You just may not trust the situation they're in. So as you talk with your teenager about preventing pregnancy, recognize this is in the context of PKU and consider what might be okay in discussing with your teenager, recognizing that they're in a different situation than a lot of their female peers. And then bear in mind that parents can play an important role for their teenagers as someone they can turn to in need of advice in heated situations, which you'll be hearing all about from Dr. Wynn Driver. So this is a balance. It's a balance between your parental guidance, and it can be important to support your teen's healthy choices, along with just letting your child make the freedom to make mistakes, make choices that you wouldn't have made for them, or they would, or you would have made in their situation or would want them to make. And yet if they're following those basic expectations, it gives them an opportunity to learn how to, make a mistake and recover from it. And you may recognize that your teens desire to make their own decisions, as they work through that process, just trying to find that right balance with your adolescent. So for teens with PKU, parenting styles that are too permissive or too authoritarian, like telling them what to do all the time, that can actually get in the way of treatment adherence and lead to poor metabolic outcomes, as opposed to supporting them as they learn how to take care of themselves and being there to help support them as they let you know what you can do to be helpful for them. So in the big picture, it is helpful to avoid fee-related power struggles with teenagers and support identity development beyond PKU. Fee toxicity to the brain during infancy is significantly different than during adolescence and adulthood. Regardless of blood fee concentrations, PKU is associated with increased emotional strain, whether it's related to the fee or how hard it is to have PKU and to have this diet and to be in a situation where you're going out with your friends and others and you can smell the food, but you can't eat it. And then evidence shows that much of what we see with PKU is reversible in these adolescents and adult. Once their Phe is able to, resume more closer to goal levels. And remember that, your clinical team is there for you. Always consult with your clinical team and healthcare providers if you have questions about your team and helping them manage PKU or any other concerns you have about your team. They can be your guide.
Thank you, Kelly and Dr. Builder. Hi, I'm Dr. Wynn Driver, and let's make sure that I'm in control here. I'm Dr. Wynn Driver, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Thank you so much, BioMarin, for having me here to speak on teaching your teens how to make decisions in hot and cold situations. These are my disclosures. What I probably also should have added to my disclosures too is that I also have 2 teenagers at home. So not only am I very passionate about talking about adolescence, but this hits very close to home as well. So I sympathize with you in the audience. If you have teenagers at home, we're going to get through this together. So I'm going to begin by talking about the ventral striatum. This area of the brain is considered the decision-making reward center, which is still developing during adolescence. This developmental phase often presents adolescents with a really tricky balance. Should they give in to their impulses, like, just do it, my parents won't find out if I do this activity, or maybe they should make a more rational decision, such as, maybe I should just wait. This isn't such a good idea. If I get caught, there's going to be a lot of consequences. Think about this scenario. If a teenager sneaks out of the house past curfew to hang out with their friends at night and doesn't get caught, what the ventral striatum does is it lights up and it's highly activated, and rewards this behavior. It continuously rewards this behavior, and it increases the likelihood that your teenager is going to continue this behavior, which can also lead to and escalate to more riskier actions. And we know that prolonged stimulation and reinforcement of this brain region can predispose individuals to more risk-taking behaviors like addiction. And this may manifest in adolescence through excessive alcohol consumption, drug use, vaping, and behaviors that can persist into adulthood. I'm having a hard time advancing, so if someone can advance for me, that would be great. I'd like to briefly discuss adolescent risk-taking, specifically adolescent driving. In 2011, there was a study that was done, and they found participants ages between 14 to 22 years old, and they were tasked to complete a computer-based driving simulation. Each of the simulations involves navigating through 20 intersections with changing traffic signals from green to yellow to red. At each intersection, participants had to decide whether to brake or chance possible collision. The timing of the signals was unpredictable, and the goal was to complete the track as quickly as possible without any crashes. So the intersections was just like any other ordinary intersection that you might find in real life. During the study, participants were accompanied by 2 of their friends. In the initial round, participants were informed that their friends were not observing, and this was called the alone phase. And then in subsequent rounds, participants were aware that their friends were watching them, and this was called the observed phase. What the study found was that adolescents took significantly more risks when they were observed by their peers. They exhibited reckless driving, ran red lights, and experienced more crashes, resulting in longer completion times. This is the reason why car insurance companies jack up their prices for adolescents. It's almost like paying a mini mortgage. I know that for my own son, who just turned 17 recently, he had asked my husband and I, he said, "Bro, is it okay if I make my car drip?" And so my husband and I were like, "Oh my goodness, no, you cannot make our car drip." And he said, "Oh, no, Mom, like, drip is actually a good thing. Drip is actually the word for making it cool or hot." Teenagers lingo these days. This phenomenon extends to real life scenarios where adolescents are influenced by the presence of their peers. Their immature frontal lobes and activated ventral striatum make risky yet exciting activities like reckless driving, binge drinking, drug use, sexual activity, and even criminal behavior more appealing. Again, we know that adolescents in general are inclined to take risks, but their risk-taking behaviors increase in the presence of their peers. Peer influence significantly impacts their decision making, leading to potentially dangerous behaviors that can have long-term consequences. I often say to my parents that I work with that to reflect on their own teenage years. I'm sure when you think back to when you were an adolescent, there were probably some things that you never told your parents, and probably even to this day don't even share with them. Next slide, please. Every adolescent, regardless of their medical challenges, desires to feel normal. They want to blend in with their peers who do not have PKU. Adolescents often share with me that they wish that they didn't have to adhere to a special diet. They want to engage in activities like spending the night at a friend's house and eating the same foods or enjoying the same foods as their friends. Sometimes, even as adolescents become young adults or as they get older, disclosing their conditions, their PKU diagnosis to a new boyfriend or girlfriend can be really daunting. I remember a 22-year-old patient expressed to me, Dr. Wengerver, I really wish that I could just go to a friend's house or go to a restaurant and order a hamburger and a beer, just like everyone else is doing. Next slide. The research indicates that individuals with PKU frequently encounter challenges related to problem solving and executive functioning and may experience even symptoms of anxiety, even when they adhere to a well-controlled diet. If adolescents with PKU are already struggling in these domains, it can result in lapses of adhering to their dietary regimen, declining cognitive and academic performance, difficulties in impulse control, such as alcohol consumption, reckless driving, smoking, vaping, going off their diet, engaging in unprotected sex, sexual activity, and encountering difficulties in social relationships, maybe getting into arguments with their siblings, or maybe even arguments with you. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the anatomy of a typical brain. We know from research that the frontal lobe, this area in the peach color here, is responsible for decision-making and impulse control, and it typically doesn't finish maturity till around age 25 years old. Unfortunately, we know from research too is that boys take a little bit longer, sometimes even later than 25 years old, with slight variations with ages and again, with boys and girls being different. I think many of you can agree that, next slide, please. In truth, this is the anatomy, the true anatomy of an adolescent brain. Their frontal lobes are not thinking about chores or schoolwork. They're thinking about love. They're thinking about the same sex, the opposite sex. And I love how at the very end of this, behind their brain is right for chores, very, very, very tiny area for them. Next slide, please. As a provider, and as you as parents, it's important to engage in really good conversations with your adolescent and young adults with PKU regarding the importance of practicing problem-solving skills during cold situations to foster independence. For instance, it's extremely important to discuss strategies for handling tricky scenarios, such as being offered a vape pen or a cup of beer at a party. However, these conversations need to occur when you and your child are in a cold situation or in a neutral situation, such as during a family dinner or while driving your teen to practice or a family outing. Find a moment when you and your teenager are in a neutral or a calm moment, okay? On the other hand, a hot situation is when your teen is experiencing a heightened or positive or negative emotional state, such as they're on their way to the epic party of the year, or when they're alone with somebody and they've had a crush on this person for the last year, or maybe they're at a party and they're starving and they haven't eaten all day. This is when reasoning and problem solving abilities and judgment goes out the door. It's challenging for the brain to engage in rational decision making during the hot moments. And the more that adolescents engage in these positive behaviors, the stronger that brain area becomes. On the other hand, practicing negative behaviors like excessive drinking, reckless driving, or engaging in casual sex strengthens those neural pathways it's associated with those behaviors. So consistent practice of positive behaviors is essential in adolescent brain development. Next slide, please. So how can we foster positive adolescent development? It has to start early, and it has to start from a young age. When we start teaching our adolescents about how to cook at teenager year, It's almost too late by that time. We need to start teaching our kids when they're 4 or 5 years old. They're in the kitchen, they're side by side. I help too. Of course, you're not going to have your child cut carrots or do anything dangerous, right? But have them stand next to you, have them mix their foods with them, have them mix their formula, put the powder inside their drink, have them participate in all of that. Because by the time that they get to be 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, they should be able to do some of these activities all by themselves. We have to act as our adolescent's second brain. So we have to function as their frontal lobe. We know that that's an area that's developing later. So we need to be there for them. We need to be that frontal lobe. Both parents and teens must work on navigating those challenging scenarios. For instance, if there's a chance that your adolescent may indulge in a large pepperoni pizza when they go to that party, you may want to suggest that they stick to their diet. They eat a big meal at home before going to that party, because that can reduce any temptation when they go out. Discuss strategies for getting themselves out of situations involving peer pressure, such as declining that vape pen, or when they get handed that cup of beer, what can they say in that moment to say, hey, you know what, this is not for me right now. I got a game tomorrow, or I got a driving test tomorrow, or I got SATs tomorrow to do. Encourage adolescents to utilize reminders on their phones for tasks and appointments. Nowadays, Android phones and iPhones are equipped with tons of reminders, and there's applications for that. So there really isn't any excuse for your adolescents to quote unquote forget, which it does happen a lot for adolescents. Teach your adolescents how to prepare simple meals, as I was saying earlier, and sticking to their dietary needs. And if your adolescent doesn't like what you have to offer, like what advice that you have to say, or maybe they just don't believe you. Sometimes my kids are like, that's not true. What you can do is you can just say, hey, you know what? Next time we go to your PKU appointment, next time we go to see your pediatrician or your doctor, let's ask for your doctor's opinion. Let's get your doctor to engage with us and to participate in your planning for your future. And it takes out that parent-child scenario, that dynamic, that power struggle. As we know, sometimes that teens often listen to advice from their doctors or from other people than they sometimes with you, unfortunately. And that's last but not least, empathize with your teens. Empathize that they're going through a really tough scenario and they're going through a tough time right now. Being a teenager today is so difficult than it was when I was a teenager. So empathize with them that they're living with a really complex medical condition that many of their teenagers don't have to go through or don't have to experience. Next slide. Thank you.
If you're interested in downloading the key messages from today's talks, go ahead and scan the QR code. I just want to thank Dr. Windriver and Kelly for presenting on this panel and joining me. And thank all of you for being a part of it and giving us some great questions for a solid answer. And Kelly, you are a superstar on sharing your experiences in such a helpful and constructive way. Thank you.